This week's new episode of Yellowjackets, episode 203, Digestif, may not have been as exciting as the previous episode, but it did give us some nuggets of information that have allowed us to create some even more interesting theories. This week's episode also offered up some hidden details, which we'll be exploring in this video, along with our latest theories. So stick around if you want to see what Miratai, aka the bad one, was saying, what baby shower foreshadowing we got, and most importantly, why the hell Lottie's followers are so partial to Fanta. So let's get into it. I wanted to start out talking about something that I actually spoke about in last week's theory video. So if you haven't seen that, I'll link it in the cards above and you can check it out on my channel. This was the one where I was talking about basically, I think, Lottie slipping something into people's drink, food, and I mean teen Lottie and adult Lottie. And I do think we got a little snippet of this again in this episode when Nat is actually out walking around the facility and she sees the antlers over Lottie's sort of cabin, and then you see Lisa sitting there with the chicken. You see Nat walking up and she's holding the drink that looks identical to the drink that Lottie had last week, and I do just think that was a little bit of a reminder. And then we also saw Nat in this episode where she was still in her clothes from last week, but she did have the heliotrope like shrug on when they were at the end of the episode and they were doing that like group therapy thing. So I do think you're seeing like a tiny little Nat taking a little ginger step forward into Lottie's orbit, because we did get some other stuff with them this week when they were having that conversation around the beehives. And I think I said this in my first Yellowjackets season 2 video, where I said I thought that the conversation would go something like that, because it very much seemed as though Lottie and Nat were both having a different conversation. Like there's something that we don't know yet about the whole queen thing.
When a new queen hatches, the first thing she does is sting all the other unborn queens to death.
I can see why you like them.
It isn't brutal. Otherwise they starve. We all do.
And I do want to speak about that a little bit more in a minute. So next, I just wanted to discuss actually the very ending where Lottie goes out and she sees the beehives and they're covered in blood, and Lottie ends up mishearing one of her followers and they say il veut de sang.
Il veut de sang.
What did you say? Are you joining for lunch?
Which means he wants blood. And I do think that we have seen a bit more of this in this episode. There's been a lot of blood spilling, and we did hear this in the previous season as well. And in this episode, when Lottie gives Shauna the baby blanket, it has the symbol on it, and then Shauna's nose starts bleeding, the blood goes over the symbol, and then all the birds start falling from the sky.
Wow.
So I do think we've seen a lot of tie-ins with blood being spilled, particularly around this symbol, and people getting what they want. So was Lottie getting some sort of validation from her followers? Because just before the birds started falling, they're all having this argument about basically Lottie, and is she, you know, just making things up, and Nat's kind of going against her.
Give them. Shauna, don't. It was a gift.
We still don't know exactly what it is.
And doesn't her baby deserve protection?
Well, I trust Lottie.
Oh yeah, newsflash.
So do I.
Me too.
So the birds falling, she did really then see who was on her side, and you are seeing these factions kind of forming. Just very briefly to talk about this too, this episode really reminded me of The Lord of the Flies, and I know the creators of the show have said basically they've based this on Lord of the Flies, which, if in case you haven't read it, Lord of the Flies is basically about a group of young boys who are stranded on an island, and there are two leaders throughout Lord of the Flies. It's basically Jack and Ralph, and it just reminded me so much of when you see the sort of splitting of the group, like the people who are with Lottie and who are not with Lottie. And in The Lord of the Flies, there is a splintering of their group. Jack forms a splinter group that is eventually joined by all but a few of the boys. And the whole reason that the boys splinter and want to be part of Jack's group is because they are, one, drawn to his protection, which I think that covers Lottie, and also drawn to this kind of savagery that happens in Jack's group, and they put on like war paint and do all these tribal dances, and I don't know, seems very reminiscent of what we saw in episode 1 with the whole masks and the whole ceremony and everything like that. So it just something to keep an eye on, because there may be further similarities coming up. Next up, I wanted to talk about why Lottie's cult is so particular and partial to Fanta. So there's a lot of cults that have drinks that they are kind of tied to. And if you're interested in cults, frauds, or scams, I have a second channel that talks about all that stuff. I'll link it down below. But the most famous example of this is the People's Temple, which most people probably know it by Jonestown or Jim Jones, where the entire cults unalive themselves. Sorry, YouTube is very particular about certain words. And they all did this by drinking Kool-Aid. So the famous kind of phrase is, don't drink the Kool-Aid, to like don't be indoctrinated or don't be sucked into something. And there are other cults that have these drinks as well. A lot of like Mormon or religious cults drink Sprite or Fanta because there's no caffeine in it, and a lot of those, you know, religious ones don't allow people to consume anything with caffeine or, you know, alcohol and stuff like that. And there's another really famous cult that has a drink, and it's not super common knowledge that this is a thing. It's more tied into the don't have caffeine, but I do have a funny story about it, because it's actually Scientology is what I'm talking about. I used to live in Tampa, Florida for like 12 years, which was the capital of Scientology. They have their big facilities and centers there. And when I was in university, I used to be the general manager for the big AMC there, the movie theater. And at Christmas, Tom Cruise used to rent out our theaters and have basically like a big showing of his movies to all the other Scientologists. And I don't think they celebrate Christmas. They used to always come at Christmas. I think it was like they didn't have anything else to do even though it was Christmas. And basically they used to show up in buses, and it was a common thing to just be like, okay, the Scientologists are coming, fire up the Sprite and the mozzarella sticks. I don't know what it was about the Sprite and mozzarella sticks, but that is what every single one of them got. And they all used to get off the bus and they would have a white polo shirt and khaki jeans or khaki pants on, and that was like their little uniform too. So that was my experience with them anyway. I looked after their Christmas stuff with Tom Cruise for years, and they never deviated from the Sprite or mozzarella sticks. So that's just a little tangent, but I'm sure this is tying in with, this is quite like a popular thing in media to assign a drink to like a little cult, because the boys have also done this with Fresca and the cult that's in that show.
Want a fresca?
Would you like a fresca?
Thank you.
Next up, this might be a little bit of foreshadowing, but when everybody is kind of preparing the baby shower gifts, we do see Mari holding up this Dreamcatcher baby mobile, and there's a kind of one spike on it, and they make this joke like, oh yeah, great, like the baby can dream that it's being like stabbed or something. And I know a lot of people think that Mari is Pit Girl. I am becoming more and more partial to that as the show goes on, and I just thought that would be a neat bit of foreshadowing if it was actually Mari, and the spike and relating it back to the very first scene of the show where we do see Pit Girl impaled on a spike. So next I wanted to talk about the whole Walter and Misty thing, and we do have Walter interviewing Randy in this episode, and I do think this is of particular note because it is obvious that Walter is very interested in the Adam Martin case, and I do think he was a bit suspicious of Misty at the end with that whole mother story that Misty told him, and Walter could know that Randy and Jeff are really good friends, and he could know that Shauna had an affair with Adam because we have been told multiple times that he can hack, and he could have gone into, records or anything like that. He definitely knows a lot of stuff he shouldn't. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched that Walter would know about Shauna's affair, and he could be speaking to Randy, trying to figure out if maybe it was Jeff who killed Adam. So that could just be like coincidence that it's happening that way. But I did also find it very interesting at the end when Misty and Walter are having their little conversation and Misty's about to leave, and Walter says he's just a bored Moriarty looking for his Sherlock.
No. I mean, why would you do all of that just to meet me?
Maybe I'm just a bored Moriarty looking for his Sherlock.
And that's kind of interesting because he didn't say a Sherlock and Watson or Watson and Sherlock. He particularly said the villain, like that is Sherlock's nemesis. So that could show that Walter is definitely not how he seems. And I know a lot of people have been making like the Dexter comparison because he's on a bow and forensics and all that stuff. And it's totally possible because, I mean, as well, it's a Showtime show. Dexter's a Showtime show, but it would be an interesting twist because Elijah Wood be a great casting choice for that, because you don't immediately go like villain to Elijah Wood. And I do think there's a lot more to Walter. What exactly? I'm not too sure yet. The final thing to talk about before I talk about Miratai is just how Lottie was looking in this episode. So towards the end of the episode, when they're doing like the group scene and the ending with the beehives, Lottie is wearing the Yellowjackets team colors. She's got like the dark blue and the yellow, and she also had a small gold necklace on when last week she had like the big stone on. And I mean, it's a TV show. Every single thing that you see or what a character is wearing is so carefully chosen and picked and curated that I can't think that's a mistake. And it just got me thinking more about the gold necklace. I did also talk about this in last week's episode with the gold necklace of the followers, and it made me again think about like the Pit Girl scene and Jackie. And then I was thinking with the whole what Lottie was saying about the queens and stinging the other queens. In a way, Jackie was like the first queen. She was the captain of the team, and this kind of passing of the necklace, it could be that, as she said, the queen hatches, she stings the other one and chooses who to kill next, and it could all be tied in that way. I'm not quite sure. There's a missing piece somewhere, but just things to put some flags on the field and say, I'm going to come back to that point later. But definitely the gold necklace, the queen, Jackie being the first one, it's all tied in there somehow. And finally, what was Miratai saying? What is going to happen?
Tell me what you want!
So Miratai, I'm pretty sure, was saying go to her, and when she does this kind of thing with her hands on her face, I really do think that she was basically making Van scars, or it could have been the mask that her and Van wore at the Doom's Coming, but I do think it's more likely the scars, because just the placement of her hands, when you look at Van's face, I'll put a picture on the screen, it does look exactly where the marks are, and she's saying go to her. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if next week we get to see adult Van. So that's my big prediction for next week, that we're going to see adult Van for the first time. And I know in this video I have some fully formed theories and some that need to marinate a little bit longer, maybe a little bit more information from the upcoming episodes. So make sure that you've checked out my other season 2 videos, because I have a ton more theories in those, and I'll link those in the cards above and down below. Make sure you follow me on social media and check out my second channel as well. As always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.